So recently I've been playing and thinking a lot about Metroid games, and where the series currently stands in terms of its gameplay. At this point, the franchise is essentially split down the middle, with the classic 2D style Metroid on one side, and the Metroid Prime series on the other. While I consider myself a fan of both styles, I generally tend to favor the Prime series, due to its emphasis on atmosphere and highly detailed environments. But more than that, I've come to realize that my love for Prime mostly stems from how well it managed to translate what was so special about 2D Metroid into a 3D game. Specifically, the interconnected map structure, the item-based progression, and the satisfaction of having the game world expand and evolve around you. Now, I grew up primarily with the Nintendo 64, a time when 3D gaming was in its infancy. As a result, I developed a very strong passion for 3D games, and the way that Prime managed to faithfully replicate such a specific formula was an amazing experience when I first played the game as a teenager. I absolutely adore the original Metroid Prime, and I have high hopes for the future of the series. However, when comparing the 2D and 3D games, I think there's one gameplay ingredient from the classic formula that didn't quite make the transition into the third dimension. For those who don't know, Metroid was partially responsible for the creation of a specific video game genre known as the Metroidvania genre. In the future, I plan to make a separate video detailing what I think defines a good Metroidvania, but for the sake of this video, just know that I believe the genre to be a sort of odd combination of both platformers and adventure games. I consider classic Metroid partially a platformer because there is a strong emphasis on maneuvering Samus through her environment in a timely manner. I also consider Metroid partially an adventure game, because it requires the use of items and abilities which must be collected in order to progress through the game. 2D Metroid has always struck a pretty good balance between these two, but my problem with the Metroid Prime games is that they seem to favor the adventure side a little too much, and they neglect that which would elevate Prime as a 3D platformer. That's not to say that Prime has no platforming, because it definitely does. You still do a lot of jumping and maneuvering Samus through the environments with special abilities. However, those who watched my genre breakdown video on platformers know that part of what makes games like Super Mario so fun is that they allow you to speed up your gameplay as you master the game's platforming mechanics. Again, 2D Metroid is excellent at this. The controls are tight and responsive, encouraging players to race through the planet's interior as fast as possible, doubly so when it comes time to backtrack through familiar areas. Metroid Prime's gameplay, on the other hand, is relatively slow and methodical compared to its 2D counterpart. In addition to Samus's already unimpressive base movement, the abilities you acquire in Prime rarely permit you to blast through areas with increased speed and skill, which reinforces the idea that these items and abilities mainly serve as keys to unlock previously unexplorable areas, just like your typical adventure game. But I think the more fundamental culprit for Prime's lack of satisfying platforming is the game's strict adherence to its first-person perspective. It's clear to me that developer Retro Studios struggled to implement some of the staple mechanics from classic Metroid without compromising the first-person viewpoint. Pretty much any maneuver that put Samus into an uncomfortable position forced the team to pull back the camera to make Samus completely visible on screen. And I would argue that these brief sequences are some of the best examples of platforming from the Prime games. The reason I think that is because once we transition into a third-person perspective, we now have a superior frame of reference as to where Samus is in relation to her surroundings, which is an important consideration for a platformer. In first person, you only have a general idea of where your character stands, so platforming always involves a slight amount of guesswork. But in third person, you have a much better idea of where you are and what you can do, because you can see your character in relation to their environment at the same time. Now that doesn't automatically mean you can't have quality first-person platforming, but when it comes to Metroid's quick and responsive control scheme, nothing beats the added visual information third person provides. So that brings us to the difficult conundrum facing the Prime series. If going third person is objectively better for platforming, which is an area that Prime clearly struggles in, then why not commit fully to that perspective? Well, because many fans, myself included, recognize that the first-person element adds so many unique and irreplaceable things to Metroid. The rich, detailed level design and heavy atmosphere I mentioned at the beginning of this video would not be nearly as special without that close and intimate perspective for players to experience it through. At this point, the first-person camera is arguably the identity of the Prime series. So I guess the answer all comes down to what you value more about the Metroid games. Personally, I value the perfect blend of adventure and platforming in my Metroidvanias, so I would be willing to sacrifice some of those first-person elements in order to bring Prime closer to the formula I love about classic Metroid. Because as it stands, I don't think the games will ever live up to being a true representation of the Metroidvania genre in 3D, and that to me is the problem with Metroid Prime. I hope that one day Nintendo reconsiders what it means to be a 3D Metroid game, and takes the necessary steps to turn Prime, or even a new series, into the experience I know Metroid is capable of delivering.